This story begins early in the morning, and from that moment on, one girl's life will never be the same again. She is asleep right now, and is completely unaware that she is out of her life at this point, and now doomed to live the life of another girl. But this story isn't just about rebirth. This girl herself created the image of the man whose fate she is now forced to live. And she'll find out soon enough. When someone started to wake her up, she couldn't figure out who it could be. After all, the parents and at this time are definitely not home, and the housekeeper could not come so early. Besides, if it had been a thief, he wouldn't have been so polite to wake her up. And when the girl started to open her eyes, she saw someone in front of her, and it was a complete stranger to her. So it was hard to realize what was happening and understand where she was. Plus, the room was kind of strange. After that, she began to suspect something amiss. And on top of that, she was clearly aware that she felt strange somehow, and this had never happened before. And after being called Marie's name by a strange girl, everything became obvious to her. But first, the first thing she definitely noticed, everything around her was completely different. And it was definitely not her home where she had fallen asleep originally. Because she was still in a sleepy state, it didn't bother her for a few seconds. But then she asked herself one question. Who was she? She had the distinct feeling that she was really in a different body. She even felt like she actually felt like someone else. And Marie was sure she was definitely not wrong. Her life won't be the same now. You can't imagine the feeling when you look at your hair or body that you've gotten used to over a lifetime and know every millimeter of it. And to look at yourself afterwards and not realize what happened, it's really a little scary, and yet there's no way to get anything back. But luckily it wasn't that bad. The girl remembers that in her real life she actually had an alias Marie, but no one could know it. And besides, why is she called by that name, since her name is something else entirely? A little later, she would realize whose body she had been reborn into. But for now, all she knows is the mere fact that she is in another body, and she has yet to guess which one. So the girl made the decision to scrutinize her appearance in the mirror to get some idea of who she was. It is impossible to imagine her thoughts at that moment when she looks at herself in the mirror, and one must accept in the reflection the new image with which one will have to live on. Suddenly she was interrupted by that girl, and apparently she was her assistant, because that's all we have so far. And you should have listened to her, and at the same time not to let it appear that such a situation had occurred. This assistant supervised that the girl tidied herself up, and to begin with, she needed to wash her face. It turns out that they were late for something, and there was no time to look at themselves in the mirror, which Marie actually wanted to do before the assistant arrived. In order to understand where they were already late for, Marie asked what day it was, and hoped that after the answer, it would be clearer to her what to expect from today. The thing is, today is the first day of the 3rd month, only days away from Thanksgiving. It turns out that you need to prepare well for it and do all the necessary things. But it was a little hard because Marie didn't even know what her role was, or what the real Marie does in everyday life. Still, everything that was happening wasn't entirely clear to her, but she tried to pretend as if she wasn't confused or frightened by anything. As suddenly, gradually, Marie began to remember something. Everything that was happening was all too familiar to her, and it was as if she was about to remember everything and realize whose body she had been reborn into after all. But when it all becomes clear to her, it's impossible to imagine how surprised she'll be. After all, it will turn out that the girl herself somehow created and invented this fate and the name of Marie, into whose life she actually got. As suddenly she began to consider everything that was going on and look at the people around her. And with each passing minute, she was beginning to realize more and more what was wrong. This plot, the girl Marie, her appearance, her fate, the people around her, and everything that will happen next. This girl invented it all herself and wrote her own book about it. Literally the day before she'd been reborn and was in her body. The girl remembered exactly how she had finished writing a book a few days ago, and it had all the exact same things that were happening to her now. Even Marie's appearance is the same as the one she made up. It's amazing, because now she's going to have to experience it for herself. All the things she once thought up for the plot of her book. So it was much easier for her, and it was possible to understand what awaited her next. It was as if she knew her fate in advance. Even so, she still had to make sure no one suspected it. The only thing she wanted to do was wait for the romantic moments, and finally enjoy your new life and live in pleasure with a handsome guy by your side. If she had known that she would someday get into the body of a girl she had made up herself, she probably would have added more of some nice moments. Mari is in the Empire of Viratin. It is the main event location of the Flower of the Empire. Though the protagonist Freya was a princess of Lorang, she had to leave the kingdom to marry a marriage of convenience to the crown prince, Kayana of the Viratin Empire. Marriages of convenience were quite common at the time, but in this case it was quite diplomatic. The kingdom of Lorang is located between the Viratin Empire and the kingdom of Gusi. There were many different countries between the two mighty nations, but Lorang is special. There was very easy passage on the Great Plain, so there was an active transit trade there, and the tax from this brought a lot of money to Lorang. As the oldest country on the continent, their culture was also very advanced, and they also had another point of pride, and that was humans. Princess Freya, she was truly one of the most beautiful girls in the empire. She was so gorgeous and irresistible that one could no doubt call her the flower of the continent. The king used her for political purposes. Viratin preferred to create dependent states through conflict between them, and the king, who found this dangerous, chose the kingdom of Gusti. But Viratin did not simply observe the union of Gusti and Lorang. The empire sent a marriage proposal to Lorang before the Gusti kingdom could do so. Therefore, the girl was indeed one of the most coveted brides in the empire. And she's had so many fans that she's used to it and doesn't think it's anything surprising. But the fact that the girl turned not into a princess, the most beautiful girl, but into Marie. But surprisingly, she does not regret it at all. Though maybe it's because Marie has something really nice and good in store for her in the future, and she knows it. But for some reason she had one thought as Thanksgiving was a little over a week away. And in order to survive, she has no other option but to seize this moment and escape. Except how do you do that when she's constantly under the care and control of multiple people in the environment? So we had to come up with a clear plan, analyze everything, and preferably act as carefully as possible. In order not to appear suspicious, she needed to pick up a book in order to learn court etiquette, or anything else to prepare for the event. At some point, an unpleasant situation happened and someone pushed someone. It caused someone's book to fall, and it looks like it was Marie's book. But somehow I got the impression that someone did it on purpose, and one of them even smiled when Marie dropped the book, while saying she was sorry it happened. But Marie was not confused, and asked that girl to pick up the book since she was so sorry. This girl tried to show with all her appearance that she didn't want to do it, because she never picks up anything from the floor, as it is too dirty there. It was obvious that none of them even tried to apologize or pick up the book. So Marie decided not to rely on anyone, and did it herself. There was nothing unpleasant for her to pick it up and shake off the dust. And when that girl saw it, for some reason she was very surprised and didn't understand how it was possible to pick something up from the dirty floor. She even wanted to ask the assistant to do it instead. The girls around after this concluded that the girl does not respect herself, since she did something for which you need helpers. But there was nothing shameful or unacceptable to her in picking up her own book, and not calling her assistants for such an occasion. It was very evident that those girls thought she was not as high status as them, and that's why they behaved towards her like that. When they started asking why Marie was doing what other people could have done instead, the girl decided to keep silent so as not to create conflict. And that girl with the blonde hair said something about how if Marie is silent, it means she has nothing to answer for and is not capable of standing up for herself. Mari decided not to react in any way, because she thought it would be very silly to argue about anything, and decided to just ignore it. And by this act she made the girl very angry, and at that moment, Mistress came in, so that girl with blonde hair could no longer how to spill and argue with Marie. And it turns out that she didn't succeed in starting a conflict with Marie, and she was starting to feel a little awkward about it. And when the mistress witnessed the situation while she was present, everyone immediately stopped talking and laughing with Marie about something, which is to be expected, because they are all only brave when they can behave as they please, and be sure that nothing will happen to them for it. And now there was no way to do so, for there was a mistress nearby who could have reprimanded her. Among these girls it was hard to find one to socialize with or befriend. None of them seemed to want it or even hide it. Still, there were 2 girls among them that she could at least socialize with and not feel uncomfortable. Lorang has one custom. Noble ladies who have reached the age of years begin to live in the temple. There they receive their education and prepare to become adults. But Princess Freya was to be educated on the condition that she did not live in the temple. At that time, a girl was chosen from the temple to take care of the princess. So Marie was asked by those new friends if she wanted to do it or not. It turns out that every girl who is trained in the temple dreams of getting out of there. Therefore, each of them wants to woo a princess. So the girls started telling Marie that this was a really good opportunity to visit the palace and start doing something new. But there was one very important point. They themselves could not decide who would be her assistant. This issue is usually handled by the person in charge. The girls who were well socialized with Marie thought that because of her beauty, she would most likely be chosen to be an assistant for the princess. The whole time they were talking, the girl felt very uncomfortable and wanted to get to her room as soon as possible. But still, we had to wait for the results to be known, and we could find out who would become the princess's assistant. But things weren't so perfect. Some of the girls looked at Marie and said she might not even hope to be chosen, and they also said that the winner is already known. But it was not true. Just someone who is too confident and likes to dream. Except that it's unclear why they would think that Marie could be worse at anything, or that she has much less of a chance than they do, for example. This girl with blonde hair was so sure of herself that it was as if there were no competitors for her, and there was no thought that she might not be the winner. This girl had several friends who considered her the main one among them and had no opinion of her own. From the outside it was very well seen. Because of this, Marie felt lonely, unlike them. No one supported her, but on the contrary, they tried to humiliate her, although no one could really know who would be chosen for this role as a result. But because of the constant unpleasant words about it, the girl began to doubt herself. And it was also hinted to her that only a girl who has a high status, only then she can claim and hope for a result in her favor. But still, this has yet to be proven, and it may just be another attempt to intimidate the contestants, including Marie. But it turns out that Marie didn't really want to be an assistant, because it wasn't a good option due to the fact that the princess would marry the crown prince and go to the empire. Despite that, she had one small dream that she's been wanting to fulfill for a long time, and it looks like it's going to be possible very soon. Namely, to see the princess with her own eyes at least once, and ideally to talk about something at least a little bit. It was lunchtime, and a very healthy and beautiful dish was brought for the girls. It looked really appetizing. It was a piece of roasted meat with roasted vegetables and a delicious sauce. When all these dishes were first brought into the room, they smelled the incredible aroma of the delicious food that had been prepared just for them, and everything seemed to be happening quite culturally, beautifully, and in the best way. But still, things were not completely easy for Marie. When she saw that everyone around her knew how to use the appliances, knew how to eat those dishes properly, and did it the way it should be done, she was uncomfortable enough. After all, she hadn't learned it all yet, and yet eating food with etiquette was incredibly difficult. But she realizes that everything can be learned, so don't feel bad. After all, they've all been in her shoes at some point. And while they were having lunch, the girl remembered how she used to live her ordinary life and had no idea what would happen to her next. At some point, she was just interested in writing an interesting book plot. But one knew that this decision would change her life a few days later. And when she lay in her bed before going to sleep, she didn't even have a thought that in a few days she would have to reincarnate into the body of one of the girls she herself had personally invented. The whole thing really does feel like some kind of fairy tale or fantasy story that could in no way exist in real life. If you tell anyone about it, people might think there's something wrong with the girl. Luckily, she opted for a romance story at that point, which had some good moments, instead of opting for some action or scary story. And there was also another thing the girl kept thinking about. Her parents probably didn't even notice her disappearance, and probably still don't suspect anything. It wouldn't even be surprising, but she is used to it and understands them perfectly well. After all, they work a lot, so they have no time to take an interest in their daughter's affairs, and they understand it perfectly well. And the only thing left for her is to adapt to the new circumstances and life challenges she must somehow cope with. Because there are enough people around who want her to be happy and successful, and at the same time, she had to try to keep calm and somehow react normally to everything that others allowed themselves to do to her. And of course, it was not always easy, on the contrary, almost impossible. The girl is really unlucky with the kind of environment she has now. There are no people who sincerely do not wish her anything bad, and are in the mood for normal communication. Practically none. In addition, even those who at first glance appear to be friendly people may actually turn out to be very different people. But fortunately, Marie understood roughly how to behave in order to look dignified and not give herself to anyone. It felt like lunch had dragged on for hours, and they were already talking too much without any particular topic of conversation. Because of this, there was a strong desire to go somewhere else, and finally be alone, so that no one else would talk, and I wouldn't have to worry about how in this or that situation the best way to behave and how best to answer someone's question. The next morning it was time to go to the priestess. But at this time it was very difficult for her, and she was beginning to worry. After all, it was a very responsible moment, and it was necessary to behave accordingly, in order not to appear suspicious and to create a good impression during the conversation. At first glance this woman seemed very kind and nice. It was not at all scary to approach her and start talking to her. So the girl was a little relieved, for the atmosphere was comfortable enough, and there was no cause for excitement. The first thing the woman inquired about was how comfortable the girl was in the temple and how she was doing, and also reminded that yesterday's situation in the library was unacceptable, and many people complained about the loud conflicts between the girls. And since the woman was responsible for this, it was her duty to warn the girls that it was no longer necessary to behave like this. Otherwise, there could be problems not only for them, but also for the woman. It's amazing that while this woman is trying to discuss this topic and point out her mistakes, she never once got angry or yelled at the girl. And then the priestess remembered that she needed help and wanted to ask those girls for it, because the feast was coming up and she could use some help. For example, in cooking, cleaning, preparing the banquet hall, organizing and planning the celebration, and much more. Of course, the girl couldn't refuse, and said she was honored to be a part of it and help in any way she could, only she couldn't understand why the woman had called her. Did she trust her more, or was there some other reason? As suddenly, unexpectedly for Marie, she is given some kind of gift, but it is still unclear what is inside, so there was a little intrigue. It turns out that it was some kind of diary, in which the girl could write down all her plans and thoughts that she had, and happened during the day. So the girl tried to show that it was very nice for her, and it was a very good gift. But it turns out it wasn't just a diary. It also contained some letters that were addressed to Marie. And after the girl returned to her room, she was very interested in opening and reading them. There were quite a few of them, and there were probably letters from some relatives or parents who may have noticed that they hadn't seen her home in a while. When she opened the present, there were an incredible number of envelopes with letters to be read, and it could take hours or even half a day to pay attention to each one of them. Also, it was difficult to decide which of them is better to read first, because it is hard to understand in which of them will be something the most interesting or important. But since it was impossible to predict, there was no other option, so she decided to just read each one in succession. Besides, she had plenty of free time, and it wasn't hard to sit down for a few hours and find out who all those letters were from. Some of them just asked how she was doing, or just wished her success and all the best, without any useful information that she had high hopes for. Besides, judging by the letters, most of them were from relatives, and hardly any from friends or anyone else, which meant that Marie really didn't have many girlfriends, but we'll find out why in a little while. But anyway, it was nice to get those letters. She felt like someone was interested in how she was doing and feeling, which means they haven't forgotten about her, and they're even thinking about writing a letter and asking how she's doing. When she got tired of dealing with the letters, she decided to reflect on the fact that she had been too attached to the opinions of others lately, and she is too sick of following the moods of others and behaving in such a way that they don't criticize her about it, because it's not normal to think about her every layer, move, or deed in order not to disappoint those who also treat her badly. As Marie began to understand and analyze this, it became clear to her that it was absolutely unnecessary to do so, and these people did not deserve to try to treat them well. So the girl decided not to think about it from now on, and to pay attention to something more beautiful, and to think only of herself, because in this place, where she lives now, a girl has the right to choose how she wants to live her life, and to remove undesirable people from her surroundings. Marie is very glad she started to realize this before it was too late, because if she had tried to please those girls, she wouldn't have had time for herself and her desires. And even though she has enough problems right now, if she solves them all, she can finally live the life of her dreams and enjoy every day. In fact, she's sure that all she needs to do is be a little more confident in herself and treat people the same way they treat her. Plus, she's starting to like it so much that she's even liking her reflection in the mirror by now. It's amazing that even when her life isn't good at the moment, she still tries to dream and believes that soon everything will change for the better. For now, she had to adapt to the situation. So the best thing to do was to go see the temple, since she had managed to wake up early, and she can't be disturbed, and she can enjoy the beauty while no one's there. While walking, she noticed some church and wondered what it looked like inside. But unfortunately, you couldn't just walk in, and it was all controlled by security, who said it's off limits and no one can just walk in. And at that moment, the girl began to realize that all these moments were created by her. And from that, everything seemed amazing and sweet to her. Plus, it was incredibly interesting to watch people she also made up on her own a few days ago. As Marie waited outside the temple for permission to enter, at one point she saw the very princess she had longed to see for a very long time. The girl noticed that when she was near her, she felt somehow different, and it was insanely pleasant and unusual. The first thing she did was greet the princess, all the while marveling at how beautiful a world she had created. The atmosphere around her, the buildings, animals, nature, people, clothing for them, and many other things seemed something fascinating to her. But none of that could compare to her, Princess Freya. When Marie saw her with her own eyes, she couldn't believe that this beautiful girl was also created thanks to Marie. When Freya saw that the girl was not allowed to enter the temple, she immediately asked the guard what was wrong, because it was unacceptable to behave in such a way towards the girl. But the guard tried to convince the princess that Marie was somehow suspicious and should never be allowed into the temple as it could be dangerous. Despite this, the princess ordered him never to do it again, because anyone who tries to enter the temple has the right to do so. When Marie felt the protection and support from Freya, she felt very pleased, because they knew each other now, and it could be considered that the girl's dream had come true. Marie is in incredible anticipation right now, because apparently her life is starting to change dramatically for the better from this point forward. And when it was time to get acquainted, the princess asked what this lovely girl's name was. Marie introduced herself, and at this point she couldn't contain her delight at meeting the princess, and even told her so. Freya replied to the girl that she was insanely pleased to hear such words, and thanked her for the compliment. As they talked, Marie began to wonder if she really wanted to get out of there, because after meeting Freya, she didn't really want to leave at all. But despite that, she still remembered that it was important to stick to her nice girl image and her plan in order not to be suspected of anything. And if need be, after a while it's easy to run away, because no matter how great she thinks everything is now, it could change at any moment. So it's too early to draw any conclusions. All she needed was to behave well in order that in the future, at every opportunity, she might act according to the plan. And in the meantime, it was necessary to keep the dialogue going and chat about the temple, which the girl doesn't know anything about yet, but tries to keep the conversation going anyway. So sometimes I tried to ask what the rules are here and what the girls about it do during the day, because there are so many of them here, and almost all of them are the same age. But the most surprising thing was that there were too many rules, and Marie asked if it wouldn't be better to abolish them, so that the girls could do what they wanted in their free time. Freya thought it looked like a request, and said that Marie would be able to keep no rules, so she would do what she liked, unlike the other girls. And of course Marie didn't expect that, and immediately apologized for daring to be disrespectful, and started complaining about the rules of the temple, and embarrassed the princess with it, who had to listen to all of this and fulfill the wishes that Marie said. And yet the princess said she was only too glad to make a more comfortable stay here for the new ladies, and it was her duty to. After that, Marie thanked Freya for everything she does for her, despite the fact that they have known each other only recently. It seems as if the princess is really willing to do absolutely anything for this girl, and she does it completely sincerely, not paying attention to the fact that she almost doesn't know this person. Apparently it was never a problem for her. In order for the princess to see if the girl would be comfortable here, she began to ask if Marie had any friends who lived here. The girl replied that she had a few friends, and thanks to them it would be much easier to settle in and feel comfortable in a new environment. But it would still be better to make a new friend and have another person around. After that, it was possible to decide what Marie wanted to do in the temple, so the princess asked what branch she was interested in. As the girl knew the princess better than anyone else, it was easy for her to increase her sympathy for herself, and replied that she had an interest in strengthening the political position of the. Not surprisingly, it worked, and Freya was actually surprised by it, and from that point on, their relationship improved significantly, because they had common interests and things to talk about. And the first thing they started discussing was that the Empire was coming to Lorang on a visit, under the pretext of attending Thanksgiving. and the two of them realized that their real goal was something else. And so the Empire definitely has other intentions that are impossible to guess at first glance. Since the Sea Aquatorium is the pride of Lorang, and the Empire is putting more effort into the salt trade. Although there are small salt mines in the Empire, good quality salt always comes from the sea, and they probably participate in Thanksgiving for the salt trade. But still Marie thought that the Viritan Empire has a lot to learn. For example, it is said that in the Empire women can also become officials or counselors, and it was amazing to them, because it was unbelievable to hear that a woman could also become an official or a counselor. After that, they wondered what other interesting facts existed in other empires. But it was at this moment that Marie knew it was best to end the conversation now and say goodbye, for it would be best for everyone. But the reason was unknown for now. They haven't even noticed how much time has passed, and it's already time to get to their duties and work. So it really would be best to say goodbye at this point. The princess remembered that she really did have a lot of unfinished business, and it was advisable to get it done before the end of the day, or else there might be trouble. So she said she had to leave, and hoped to have a place in the future where they could also talk more often comfortably. Marie couldn't believe that it was the same princess talking to her. Plus, they had just spent a lot of time together, something the girl couldn't even dream of doing. So she replied that she was just as excited about this meeting. It was a pleasure to spend this time with her. When it was time to say goodbye, it was like a dream to her, and Marie could not believe that she had just been chatting sweetly with the princess, and it was not even too exciting, but on the contrary, very pleasant and comfortable. Although initially she thought that everything would go the opposite way, exciting and uncomfortable. She used to think it was all just impossible, and she just wasn't worthy of being around Freya, much less talking about anything for any length of time. The only conclusion she drew was that if soulmates existed, her soul would be this beautiful girl, and of this she had no doubt at all. And then there was a moment that seemed to the girl just incredible, and just something impossible. The princess asked if she could consider Marie as her friend. The girl, of course, tried not to pretend that she just couldn't believe it, and couldn't even dream about it. So she answered that she would be happy to stay with her as friends, who could share their secrets, talk about different topics, and have a good time. And now it's definitely time to say goodbye because there's too much unfinished business that needs to be done immediately. They enjoyed their time together so much that they didn't even want to say goodbye. And it was very hard, but still they had no choice. And as hard as it was, it had to be done. I hoped that this friendship would last a long time, and that each of them would be really sincere towards each other, because they are really good girls. And it would be a pity if there were conflicts or misunderstandings between them. Now Marie has someone she can trust and not doubt, because originally she could not even dream that she would have such a friend. After she got to her room, she began to remember that not long ago she had dreamed of at least seeing her from afar. And now they've become best friends, and yet such a thing was suggested not by Marie, but by the princess herself, which is even more surprising in this situation, and previously seemed impossible. And also before, princess was some unattainable level for a girl that seemed simply unattainable. And it turns out that in one day Marie realized her dream. When the girl was coming up with the plot, she liked Freya a lot even then, and was one of her favorite characters. But that was just her affection as a writer observing the main character. However, the princess she met in person was real, and many times better than she could have imagined. And instead of watching, there is now an opportunity to be friends with her and talk about different topics. Surprisingly, when a girl is in her presence, she feels an incredibly pleasant atmosphere. And because of this, you want to be in her presence as long as possible, and not go anywhere. Freya now truly understands how important it is to have someone you can trust around you, and feel as comfortable as possible around them at the same time. Except there was one very important point. Marie already knew that the princess would have to go through hard times in the future, and was wondering if she could change the plot a little bit to make it a little easier for the princess. But it was too dangerous, because if you interfere with the plot, things could go in a completely different direction, and it would be much harder to know what happens next. So the girl decided that it would be best if she stayed by the princess's side and helped her when times got tough, and it was really needed. Marie was certain that from now on it was her duty to protect Freya from any trouble or hardship. One day, Marie was in her room, and as usual, she was thinking about something, to understand how to behave better, and thanks to it to achieve success and her goals. But at that moment an acquaintance comes to her, who was in a hurry to tell her something, and it seems that it was something important and urgent. Except Marie had no idea what this girl wanted to talk about. It turned out that she had heard the priestesses in the corridor discussing that the list of those who would help the princess was already ready, and the results would soon be known to everyone. But that wasn't the best part. The girl heard something they were talking about, and it turns out there's good news for Marie. The list had suddenly changed, and Marie had recently been added to it. When the girl heard about it, she couldn't believe it, because she was sure that only those with high status or from special families were added to the list. As a result, Marie became the princess's assistant, so it was time to go to her palace. And from this moment her life begins to change dramatically. She is waiting for unforeseen events and new acquaintances, for which she must prepare herself. After a wonderful day spent meeting new people at the princess's palace, it was time to say goodbye and go home, as we have to get ready for the next day, which will be the girl's first day of work. This day was really beautiful. The princess invited a lot of guests. Everyone socialized well with each other and had a nice time. It was a good start to a new phase in Marie's life. It was already dark outside, so we had to hurry to get home as soon as possible. This road was very difficult and dangerous, and the girl didn't know it at all, and didn't know where they were going. And at some point the girl began to suspect that they were going down some strange road. But she began to reassure herself, for she knows relatively well that no danger awaits her. When suddenly she realized she was wrong. Some man came up to her and ordered her to come out immediately. He seemed overly aggressive, and there was no telling what he wanted. It was really starting to freak Marie out, as suddenly, she definitely began to realize that he was trying to hurt her somehow, and needed to call for help, or somehow try to escape it on your own. At that moment she felt as unprotected as possible, and realized that she had to save herself somehow, because he was acting erratically, and you never knew what to expect from him. Marie had given up hope that she would be able to escape. But a miracle happened, and she had a chance to survive. Some guy was nearby and heard a girl calling for help, so he ordered that man to let her go immediately, or he'll regret it very much. It looks like that man was scared, so he immediately ran off somewhere else. Marie had completely failed to expect that her savior might be somewhere nearby. That keeps her alive and safe. This guy asks if she's okay because the girl looks really scared. Turns out this guy is the commander of a knightly order, and his name is Hugo Scutt. Because she was in shock, it was hard for her to answer and talk to him. She didn't even realize that the crown prince's childhood friend was in front of her, and this person was actually respected by many people. And it wasn't surprising because it's very hard to recover from a situation like that. But still she was much relieved, and she knew that she was quite safe with him. To calm her down, Hugo suggested we get in the carriage and talk it over. He was sure that he should try as hard as possible to let the girl know that he could be trusted, and she could not be afraid of him. So he tried to be as polite to her as he could to get her to trust him. As suddenly, he saw that her dress was a little torn, and she was a little embarrassed to be in such a form. But she wasn't alone. Who was uncomfortable with the situation when he saw it, didn't notice at all how his face immediately turned red, because he was a little embarrassed, and he didn't want her to see that he looked there. Marie realized that she was probably making this young man feel uncomfortable, because he didn't want to seem too cocky. The girl felt uncomfortable because she realized that her appearance very much embarrasses the guy, and makes him nervous, although it is not so. While they were trying to get into the carriage, the two villains were devising another plan to get their way. One could only hope that the girl's savior would stay with her, and not let her be in danger again. If Hugo just goes off on his own afterward, Marie's not going to be able to save herself a second time. So they needed to stick together to prevent this situation from happening again. The man and the guy, who were probably in on it, promised the girl that it wouldn't happen again. But it was very important that Hugo realized that they weren't telling the truth and take matters into his own hands, because obviously after he leaves, they'll probably want to hurt the girl again, and that situation will happen again. But luckily the guy decided to go with the girl and make sure she was okay. When those two guys found out about it, of course they were upset, because now they cannot get their way, because the girl is now guarded by Hugo. But that was only their problem. The important thing was that Marie was now safe, and had nothing to worry about. She'll be able to go home safe and secure in the knowledge that she'll be protected. Except, of course, that it would have been taken care of from the beginning, for it was a very great risk to go home with strangers whom she did not know at all, because those two guys were afraid, and thought that because of this situation someone would punish them, and they would get in trouble. They immediately started apologizing, and promised not to do it again. It was very strange, because with their behavior they showed that they were confident and capable of something only in relation to a defenseless girl, thus showing that they were too weak, for anyone can feel strong after a defenseless lady, and they were only able to take advantage of it, and to look fearless and strong against her background, though as it turned out it was not so at all. But still the girl was saved, and all she had to do in the future was to keep her mistakes in mind, and not allow anything like this to happen. And in some ways the experience has been rewarding. I'm sure Marie will be grateful to Hugo for the rest of her life, because without him, there's no telling what might have been in store for her, and what would have happened to her if it hadn't been for him. They finally reached their destination, where the girl's new life was to begin, and it was very exciting because you could see from afar how much everyone had prepared for her arrival, and it was very responsible and scary for her. But in Hugo's presence, she felt much better and more at ease, even though it was a very important day, and there was an awkward silence between Marie and Hugo, and it seemed that the girl felt a sympathy for him, which she concealed for the moment, for she did not understand what that strange feeling was. It's starting to look like they met for a reason. Maybe it's their destiny, and that's the circumstances in which they were meant to meet. In his presence, the girl felt very comfortable and unafraid of everything that was going on around her. As they had arrived here much earlier than she had supposed, Marie had a bad feeling about the purpose for which she had been brought here. While she was looking all around, someone looked at her and was indignant at the way she looked and who she was, and he seemed to be upset about something. He'd been told some noble lady was coming, and the girl he saw in front of him couldn't be called an aristocrat or a respectable girl, and Marie noticed it at once, for the man did not even try to hide his displeasure, and behaved rather unkindly to the guests. It turns out that it was Prince Viratina, and apparently the first acquaintance with him failed. He clearly does not want to accept the fact that the girl in front of him is completely different from what he imagined her to be. But maybe this guy acts like this with absolutely every person, and his behavior is not worth paying attention to. But for now, Marie had to see for herself, and then draw conclusions about the kind of person he was. The most unpleasant thing was that before arriving, the girl thought she would be welcomed as a long-awaited guest. But the result was the opposite. She openly tried to show that she was not welcome here at all. She's getting more and more frustrated by the minute, because she's uncomfortable being a guest and feeling unwelcome. This guy turned out to be a real brute with a terrible temper, but also a handsome face. Although, it would seem that such a thing could not combine in one person. It seems like he's trying to protect himself, because of his character, no one will want to talk to him for more than 2 minutes. It's amazing that this man is really talented. If it wasn't for his character, he would be a perfect person in all fields, and would have many friends and fans. After a bad encounter, the girl thought it would be a good idea to settle in a little and change, which she actually started to do. And how pleased she was when she was able to wash up after the road, tidy up and put on the new clothes the helpers had prepared for her. But still, after the long journey, Marie was very much hungry, and would not refuse a delicious and light dinner. So in order not to wait for dinner and not to ask someone to cook it, she thought that she could take some fruit from the basket, and it would be a nice light dinner, since the girl had not eaten anything at breakfast or lunch, and really wanted to take an apple. But unfortunately, it wasn't real. These fruits were decorative to look pretty on the table, and their function was merely to create the illusion of something present on the table. Except she didn't know that, and it was a little awkward for her. As a friend, she hears someone call out to her, and after that she felt doubly uncomfortable, because that person could see the girl trying to take a bite of a fake apple. But luckily he hadn't noticed anything, and had come to ask or say something, though perhaps he just wanted to see if the girl was all right, and how well she was settling in, because surely in a new mansion, it would be hard for her to navigate and find the right room. So it would be better for someone to be there for her when she needs guidance. When Marie looked at him, the girl hoped that the guy would notice her beauty after she had washed her face, and her face was a little fresher and prettier. But it seemed that he was not interested at all, and he came for a different reason altogether, namely, to leave here a bandage of medicine to treat her hand after that unpleasant situation. Marie had hoped until the last moment that he would give her some compliment about how beautiful she was, but unfortunately, she didn't wait for it. And after that, he did tell her why she was brought here, and what the purpose of her presence in this mansion was. It turns out she has to answer a few questions, And if she answers all of the prince's questions, then she will be taken back to the temple. Only what those questions will be is unknown, but very interesting. And most importantly, what she was interested in, for what purpose, and why they would ask her something. No one has explained anything to the children so far. The girl there is in complete incomprehension of what is happening. After a while the prince came to her, and by the looks of it, they are going to ask her something. But there was only one problem. The girl is not ready for it, and doesn't know how to answer everything correctly. In order not to regret it later, and not to create problems. The fact that she was there all alone created an uncomfortable atmosphere for her, because she didn't feel supported by anyone, and she didn't feel the presence of a loved one. She really needed it at that moment, though, in order for her to be much more comfortable and relaxed there. After she was met, it added to the fear and uncertainty of whether she'd even be let out of there. But despite this, the girl still had to look confident and calm, because a lot could depend on it later on. To control the prince's behavior towards Marie, and his aides were standing by, because everyone knows how hard it is for him to be polite to anyone. But when he was reprimanded, he didn't like it the most, and when he was corrected, he would get even angrier and behave quite aggressively towards those around him. To justify why he was reprimanded, his aides said he was only doing so because the prince was acting as a representative of the Viritan Empire here, so one should behave accordingly, and preferably be more polite to the guests. And for some reason the prince forgets every time that his assistants have the right to do it, because he himself realizes that sometimes he is too unkind to those around him, and he still needs to be corrected and reminded about it from time to time. And in order not to downgrade himself in front of the girl, he decided to remind his assistant that he had better not interfere, as he might be punished for it. And in order to maintain his status and majesty, the aide did admit his guilt, and apologized for daring to correct his lord. At that moment, the girl didn't realize what her part in this conversation was, because they started fighting among themselves, and as if they forgot that they were not alone. But even though she felt superfluous, in that moment she could admire his looks, and observe his incredible facial features, which she found incredibly attractive. The girl even had thoughts that if it were not for his terrible character, she would have fallen in love with him long ago at the first meeting, which he managed to spoil safely. Basically doesn't even try to show respect for Marie, and probably doesn't even think about how uncomfortable and hurtful it is for her to feel and be around him. The only nice thing about that night was, literally minutes later, dinner would be ready, and one could enjoy an incredibly delicious meal, and thus fix the experience of the evening. When it was time to sit down at the table, Marie just could not believe what she saw in front of her, because this is what she had dreamed of since the morning, but did not even think that everything would be so beautiful and appetizing. There was absolutely everything, and it seemed as if it could be enough food for a whole week, and to eat it all in one dinner seemed unrealistic. Marie was so hungry that she wanted to eat absolutely everything, but still had to stick to the image of an elegant lady who never eats too much. If no one had seen her at that moment, she had the feeling that it would have been no problem for her to eat absolutely everything that was prepared on the table. And Marie was doing her best not to start grabbing absolutely everything and forget any rules of etiquette. And yet her desire to enjoy her food was stronger than her desire to make a good impression as an elegant lady at dinner. So she couldn't help herself, and started to take everything she sees very quickly, and forgot that there was a prince sitting next to her, for whom such behavior might not be allowed for a lady like Marie. Apparently he would be really surprised and shocked now. The first thing she started with was a delicious chicken that was lying in the center of the table, and from it came an incredibly appetizing aroma that the girl couldn't resist. When the prince saw that the girl did not even try to look elegant, to create a good impression of herself, and to demonstrate any knowledge of table etiquette, it was just a shock to him, for he certainly did not expect such a thing at the first dinner with her. She didn't even need any utensils. She just grabbed what she found most appetizing and started eating with her hands, not paying attention to anything, and with absolutely no thought of what the prince, who was at this moment watching her, might think of her. As expected, because of managing dinner and eating absolutely every last bite, it took her quite a bit of time to do so. Marie ate everything so fast that it seemed as if she hadn't eaten anything for a month, and had just gotten some food today that felt like it was her last meal, and she would never see it again. In just a few minutes there wasn't a single piece of meat left on the table, She had even forgotten that maybe the prince would have liked to try something too. But unfortunately, he didn't have time, and there was nothing left for him to eat. He just watched her, made some conclusions, and did not understand what was happening now, because he had never seen anything like this. And it was very strange to him that such a girl could eat so much food at once. And when she noticed that the prince was watching her, she asked him a very strange question, which he certainly did not expect to hear. Namely, did he really like to watch other people eat? He just smiled and said she had misunderstood him. In fact, he hadn't expected to see that from her. She wasn't embarrassed at all to act like that in front of him, and acted like they had dinner like that every time, and he was used to it. And as cliché as it sounds, Marie decided that she would eat first and only then apologize for her behavior. When she was already full, she said it was truly the most delicious dinner of her life, and she had never seen only appetizing food. So she couldn't help herself, and accidentally ate everything they had prepared for them. After they've eaten, at which point an assistant comes in to see how they liked it, and how good it was, and it was too sudden for them. For the prince and Marie had not even had time to react, and realized that someone was about to come in, though they tried to make it appear as if they were imperfectly calm, and not at all frightened by his sudden appearance. When that guy saw that there was hardly any food left on the table, and yet there weren't many people there to eat it all, he was a little surprised, because it was all eaten by her and the prince in a very short time. When he realized that they really enjoyed everything the cook had prepared for them, he decided to offer some dessert last to end the meal well. Except at this point, the prince realized that he had only eaten a few dishes, and wondered how the girl could be okay with one more dessert after so much food for the night. It was hard for him to even comment on it, because as a man he couldn't have eaten so much food, and the nice girl at the table next to him hardly felt any problem in eating the whole table at once without anyone's help. He wouldn't even be surprised if the girl now ordered 5 desserts and several cakes. It was really hard for him to understand how it all fit in her, because she's a girl. After that, he really started to look at her more and more, because she surprises him more and more each time, because she's so unconventional, and she's not even shy about being herself in this environment with the prince. There was really something special about her. He could feel it, but he didn't yet understand what it was about her that was so special that other girls didn't. It was interesting for him to get to know her better and see who she was. The prince even said it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen, and so he was even able to forgive her behavior and allowed her to go to rest. But she wasn't going to leave at all until dessert was brought, and she'd finished her dinner. After that, he definitely couldn't help but start laughing. It was really something new. He hadn't met people like that before, and it was interesting to watch her. Because whatever she says, it makes him laugh and lifts his spirits, although it's very hard to make someone like him laugh and see him in a good mood. And surprisingly, she's the only one who can do it. It's been a whole day since she's been in some obscure place, and it still hasn't gotten to the point of doing the deed and going home. Everyone's probably looking for her right now, and they have no idea where she is. She hasn't told anyone about her plans and where to look for her in case of anything. The girl was especially worried about what the princess would think about it. They had agreed to meet her at the temple, and it was likely that Freya would get very worried when she found out that the girl hadn't been on the mansion grounds for a long time now. Marie didn't even have a chance to get out of there and somehow tell the princess that she was actually okay, because she was locked up so she couldn't escape, and she stayed until she did her job. And in order to meet her friend and not wait for someone to approach her, she decided to act so that she could finish her business and go back. For that, you had to go to some person from whom you could get all the details, or some important information, without which it would be hard to navigate what was going on and understand what they needed from her. But first she really wanted to go outside and walk around a bit, because she is constantly indoors and could use some fresh air. But in order to do that, you have to get a special permit so that the guards can let her out. But the fact that she's being kept locked up, each time she starts to dislike it, because she stops feeling like a free person, and it feels like she has no right to anything, and she's being held hostage, although no one really has the right to decide whether she can go out if she wants to, because she's a free person who doesn't owe any of them anything, while they're the ones who care that she agrees to give some answers to their questions, and they're the ones who have to worry about making her as comfortable as possible. But it's as if the girl is under their control and has no right to do anything while in the house. And in order to persuade them to let her out, She offered to go out with a person who will control and accompany her, if it's so important to them. And it seemed like a good fit for them. Plus that boy didn't mind going out with a pretty girl like Marie. At that moment, she realized that being beautiful was sometimes very convenient, and it could be of some use or benefit, and she had just been convinced of that. After this situation, she began to feel like a more attractive girl, and also added no small amount of self-confidence to her body. During the walk, she noticed how the guy who looked like the one who had recently saved her was practicing, and it was interesting for her to watch it, because she saw him as an incredibly handsome guy she had liked since the first time she had met him. A few minutes later, when he turned around and saw her, Marie realized for sure that it was Hugo. The girl was very glad to see him, for he was the only one with whom she had good communication, and more or less trusted him. At the sight of him, her mood visibly lifted, she felt better, and felt much more comfortable in his presence. But as Hugo was well aware that she was not allowed to go out of the house, he reminded her of this at once, for he did not know that she had already made arrangements for it, and had agreed to be accompanied during the walk. So it was all right, and the girl had not violated anything. But for some reason Hugo didn't like something about who was escorting Marie. So he decided to make someone else responsible. It would be some girl who could take Marie wherever she needed to go. And at this point Marie was starting to feel very uncomfortable and awkward, because she'd had trouble getting that guy to accompany her. And now it turned out he might be free, and his help was no longer needed, except that no one knew what had caused Hugo to replace the girl's escort. So Marie decided to make things right, and said that the guy hadn't done anything wrong. She'd asked him to accompany her because she wanted to go for a walk, and he'd helped her do it. But Hug was too busy, and didn't have time to deal with the situation, so he asked her to just go back to the room, and after a little while they could talk about everything and figure out who was to blame and who wasn't. After that, Marie was convinced that this man was somehow boring, but at the same time too beautiful. She didn't even have time to admire him and enjoy his presence. As suddenly, he asked her to stop because he wanted to say something to. Marie thought he was about to let her walk around some more, but she was wrong. He asked her to stop for a completely different reason. It turns out that he just wanted to apologize for his behavior yesterday. He was still a little embarrassed in front of her, and had been looking for an excuse to see her all day to ask for forgiveness. And he said he just didn't get the time right, so it was an unpleasant situation that made him feel bad for her. But she in turn tried to pretend like there was nothing wrong with it, and he shouldn't even apologize for anything. But she didn't really want to talk about it. So when he wanted to say something more to her, the girl tried to avoid another conversation on the subject, and said that she should go back to the room as soon as possible, for her long absence from the house might bring a lot of trouble, and the knight might not be happy about it, so it was better not to let it happen. But it turns out that's not what he meant to say, and the girl misunderstood him. He was about to say that he would soon bandage her injured wrist as well, since it was time to take care of it, and do whatever was necessary to get her arm out of pain and back to normal as soon as possible. But because he still felt guilty before her, he didn't want to be intrusive and seem too impudent. Hugo, unlike the others, tried to be as polite as possible with this girl. Meanwhile, the knight had long since noticed that the girl was not in her room, and began to wonder why she needed to go out somewhere. Apparently he cares too much about the girl not going anywhere, so they offer every effort to control that. It becomes very interesting what questions he has prepared for the girl, and what benefit he will get after finding out the answers to them. And most importantly, it is still incomprehensible why he treated her so badly in the beginning, if thanks to her, he could get the information he needed and useful for him. He had absolutely no reason to treat her so badly. For some reason it's important for him to be very strict with her, but the reason is still unknown. Even the fact that Hugo and some assistant treat her very differently, he's not happy with that either. It turns out that in fact, when he first saw her, he had a very hard time holding back his laughter because of her appearance, because she looked a little unkempt, and her clothes weren't fresh enough, and it was very noticeable. And so, in order not to be laughed at, he began to behave rather impolitely, and pretended not to be at all pleased with her. But when she came out dressed up like a gorgeous flower, he completely changed his opinion of her, and began to admire her appearance every time, because he saw how beautiful she could be. It seems that after that, he had feelings and interest in her. He even tried every time not to say anything unnecessary, so that she did not guess that he began to like her. And apparently from this moment, the relationship between them can change for the better, which the girl does not even suspect. Even when she didn't look quite right. Even so, he noticed some unique trait in her that he really liked. It was unusual for him to laugh, and the fact that it happened in her presence meant to him that she was really special. Although he looked at her rather rudely, in that moment he was admiring her rare beauty, and the unpredictability that showed through every minute of it. This girl was the first to make him smile, and he felt comfortable enough around her, though he tried not to pretend that he was. When he caught himself thinking about her, he tried to figure out if it was interest, love, or whatever the definition was, but he still couldn't understand why he was so interested in her. So he decided to think about it another time. Even though he has a huge interest in her and enjoys spending time with her, Knight still continues to pretend like he has nothing for her and is not interested in her. The first thing he asked her was if she'd forgotten where she was and who was in charge. Marie hadn't expected any other reaction from him, so she was prepared to hear about how she had no right to go outside the house and break the rules. And in order to remedy the situation, the girl decided to offer him tea. This was to help prevent conflict and make things a little better. And it seems to have worked. She really knows how to resolve conflict. But there was one thing that spoiled things a little bit. The thing is, the Knight only likes a certain kind of tea, and the one the girl made him was too bitter for him, and it was very hard for him to drink. But surprisingly, he didn't reprimand her for it because he didn't want to yell at her and ruin the mood. And while he was looking at her, he couldn't stop admiring her, and thinking that she was really very beautiful, and even wondering how he could not notice her beautiful looks before. When suddenly, the girl decided to seize the moment and ask why he had brought her here, to which he told the girl to follow him, and he would show her something interesting. Only she had no idea yet what it might be, or why she needed to go anywhere for that matter. While they were walking somewhere, she couldn't get enough of the incredibly beautiful views that caught her eye. After they came to some place, the Knight began to show her something, but what it was she did not understand, and couldn't even begin to imagine what she was looking at right now. It was like some kind of map or room layout in some building, when suddenly, she began to realize what it was, and apparently it was something special and very valuable. Because after she saw it, she concluded that it could be a real breakthrough in history, and yet what could it be?